Immigration enforcement has reached a dangerous new level in Los Angeles. And what happened to Amanda Trebach should terrify every American who believes in constitutional rights. The story unfolding here isn't just about immigration raids, it's about federal agents arresting U.S. citizens for exercising their First Amendment rights, and the chilling location where this is happening makes it even more disturbing. Let's start with what happened. Amanda Trebach is a nurse and community activist who was violently arrested early Friday morning while recording ICE agents conducting operations in Los Angeles. She's a U.S. citizen. She wasn't breaking any laws. She was simply documenting what federal agents were doing in her community, something that's protected under the First Amendment.
The family says when Esther showed up for the meeting, she was detained and immediately transferred to a detention center in Clinton County.
Well, that situation in particular, I think, is a terrible thing, because how could you be an illegal citizen when you're already going through the process of gaining your legality? I don't think that's right at all.
The family says Esther could be deported within weeks, and they're now raising money for good legal representation. I spoke with James, a refugee, who says he came to the States legally 25 years ago and is now a U.S. citizen.
I cannot see why President Trump want to take people who are already legalized to live in America out of this land. Because this land is a land of immigrant.
The Lancaster community is now rallying around the Solomon family.
Footage of her arrest shows two plainclothes, masked agents pinning her against the pavement, kneeling on her back to handcuff her. One agent even put his knee on Trebach's head briefly as witnesses yelled for him to stop. This isn't just excessive force, it's the kind of brutality we've seen used against protesters and journalists across the country. Trebach was held in federal custody for over a day before being released Saturday without any criminal charges. Think about that for a moment. Federal agents arrested a U.S. citizen, used force against her, held her for more than 24 hours, and then released her without filing a single charge. If there was no crime committed, why was she arrested in the first place? The answer reveals something deeply troubling about how ICE is operating under the current administration. Ron Goches, an organizer with Unión del Barrio, didn't mince words. This is just another example of the Trump administration and their fascist ICE agents, or whoever they are because they're unidentified, violating the rights and breaking the law that they're supposed to protect. But here's where this story gets even more disturbing. Trebach was arrested while participating in what's called a peace patrol outside Terminal Island, a Coast Guard base that ICE and Customs and Border Protection are using as a staging area for raids across California. And Terminal Island isn't just any location. It's a place with one of the darkest chapters in American history. Terminal Island was once home to a thriving Japanese-American fishing village of nearly 3,000 residents. These weren't just immigrants, many were U.S. citizens, second and third generation Japanese Americans who had built a vibrant community with shops, schools, Buddhist temples, a bank, and even their own unique culture that was distinct from other Japanese American communities. Then came December 7th, 1941, and Pearl Harbor. Within weeks, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, and Terminal Island residents became the first Japanese Americans on the West Coast to be forcibly removed from their homes. They were given just 48 hours to pack up their entire lives. Families that had built businesses for generations were forced to abandon everything. By April 1942, all 3,000 residents had been shipped off to internment camps, most to Manzanar in the Owens Valley. But here's what makes Terminal Island unique among all the Japanese American communities destroyed during World War II. After the residents were removed, the Navy demolished virtually everything. While other communities lost their homes and property, Terminal Island was the only place where the entire built environment was erased. Today, only 2 buildings from that original fishing village remain. There's a memorial to the Japanese fishing village dedicated in 2002 with a bronze statue of 2 fishermen facing opposite directions, a reminder of the community that was wiped from existence. And now, more than 80 years later, federal agents are using this same location as a staging ground to conduct raids on predominantly Latino immigrant communities. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore, and they're not lost on the community activists and descendants of Terminal Island residents who are monitoring ICE operations there. Joy Yamaguchi, a member of Nikki Progressives whose family was affected by the internment, said, "When I and other Japanese Americans heard that ICE was using this area as a staging ground for their agents to go out and kidnap community members, we were appalled." The community response has been swift and organized. Groups like Unión del Barrio, Harbor Area Peace Patrols, and Nikki Progressives have been conducting daily monitoring of Terminal Island. Watching as federal vehicles stream in and out of the facility, they're documenting license plates, tracking movements, and alerting immigrant communities that outrage and raids are about to happen. This is exactly the kind of peaceful legal community organizing that Amanda Trebach was participating in when she was arrested. These volunteers aren't breaking any laws. They're not interfering with law enforcement operations. They're simply exercising their constitutional rights to observe and document government activities in public spaces. But ICE's response has been to escalate rather than respect these rights.
More than a dozen people were detained outside the store on Wilshire Boulevard in the Westlake area in an operation they called Trojan Horse, according to the Department of Homeland Security. They went on to say, quote, Border Patrol conducted a targeted raid that resulted in the arrest of 16 illegal aliens from Guatemala, Mexico, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Video from News Chopper 4 also showed a Penske moving truck at the operation. Penske Trucking Company later released a statement saying in part it strictly prohibits the transportation of people in the cargo area of its vehicles, and they were not made aware that its trucks would be used and did not authorize this.
The agency has faced widespread backlash over the arrest of community advocates across the country, many of them U.S. citizens like Trebach. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of targeting people who document immigration enforcement activities. The scope of what's happening in Los Angeles is staggering. Since June, federal agents have been conducting what they call roving patrols through predominantly Latino neighborhoods.
Manuel Florido is working this site in Ontario. Although he's documented, he says many of his co-workers are not. He says they're not showing up to work. Across the street and 2 stories up, this worker says they have a fifth of the people on this job as they usually do. He admits he's scared of recent raids. But he goes on to say he is more afraid of not being able to support his family.
Making warrantless arrests of day laborers, street vendors, car wash workers, and others. Despite the Trump administration's claims that they're targeting violent criminals, the vast majority of those detained have no criminal records, and the tactics being used are increasingly militarized. Federal agents regularly use force against unarmed individuals, many of them U.S. citizens. They've been seen tackling people to the ground, shattering car windows to pull people out, and using what appear to be smoke devices and flashbangs to disperse crowds of protesters.
According to the National Day Labor Organizing Network, also known as Endalon, at least 20 people were detained outside in this parking lot in front of the Home Depot this morning. We do have video we want to show you. This was shared by a witness who was here and saw this all unfold. You can see what appears to be a person detained being walked through the lot by a federal agent. Then a car pulls up, and that person is placed inside. This happened around 9:30 this morning. You can see in the cell phone video federal agents that appear to be armed standing next to their truck as people are gathering video, and there's also what appears to be protesters standing outside on the other side of this fence. As these immigration operations continue, especially at local Home Depots, some leaders are calling for more transparency.
The legal challenges are mounting. A class action lawsuit has been filed against the Department of Homeland Security, alleging that these operations look less like lawful arrests and more like brazen midday kidnappings. The lawsuit is seeking an injunction that would halt warrantless arrests, require agents to identify themselves, ensure due process rights, and guarantee access to attorneys. But even as legal challenges proceed, the community organizing continues. The peace patrols that Trebach was part of operate throughout Los Angeles, with volunteers trained to spot undercover ICE vehicles and alert communities through social media and group chats when raids are imminent. Ron Gochez explained their work. We drive around our neighborhoods, we look for any type of suspicious vehicles or any type of ICE activity so that we can document and then alert the community so that our people have the chance to defend themselves, protect themselves and their families from being kidnapped. He emphasized that this is peaceful work. We don't advocate for violence. We don't break any laws. We have a legal team who's advised us on what we can and cannot do. So we're really clear about what we're doing. Yet it's exactly this kind of peaceful, legal community defense work that's being criminalized. The arrest of Amanda Trebach sends a clear message. Even U.S. citizens exercising their constitutional rights aren't safe from ICE's increasingly aggressive tactics. The historical echoes are haunting. Terminal Island's Japanese American residents were also law-abiding community members who found themselves targeted by federal agents. They were also told they were being detained for national security reasons. They were also given no real opportunity to defend themselves or challenge their treatment. And just like today, there were people who tried to help. Baptist missionary Victoria Swanson organized assistance for Terminal Island families during the forced evacuation, later recalling, "The women stayed up all night and packed, and the next morning when the trucks came, of course, some families weren't ready. In some cases, we had to pull them from the house crying." Today's community organizers see themselves carrying on that tradition of mutual aid and resistance. Cynthia Aviña, a member of the Community Self-Defense Coalition, said, "We have learned from these horrific attacks from the past, and most importantly, we have learned from our ancestors how to fight back and organize. But they're facing an administration that seems determined to criminalize even the most basic forms of community solidarity." Earlier this month, a federal grand jury indicted a man simply for handing out face shields to people protesting ICE operations. The man, Alejandro Orellana, was charged with conspiracy to aid and abet civil disorders for distributing protective equipment. The message is clear. The Trump administration doesn't just want to conduct immigration raids, it wants to eliminate any form of community resistance or documentation of its activities.
The construction of Camp East Montana at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, began mid-July in response to a request from Homeland Security. Pentagon Press Secretary Kingsley Wilson defended the use of the military base to initially detain 1,000 migrants awaiting deportation.
Once DoD achieves initial stand-up, we will finish construction for up to 5,000 beds in the weeks and months ahead. Upon completion, this will be the largest federal detention center in history for this critical mission, the deportation of illegal aliens.
So far, the Army has spent $232 million on the tent city at Fort Bliss. The U.S. Army oversees the $1.24 billion contract for the 5,000-bed ICE facility, and last month awarded the contract to build the facility to Acquisition Logistics, a Virginia-based company.
This is a direct assault on First Amendment rights, and it's happening in a location that serves as a permanent reminder of what happens when the government is allowed to target entire communities without accountability. What's happening at Terminal Island today isn't just about immigration enforcement. It's about whether we're going to allow federal agents to operate with impunity, arresting U.S. citizens for documenting their activities, using excessive force against unarmed individuals, and conducting warrantless raids that terrorize entire communities. The descendants of Terminal Island's Japanese American residents understand the stakes better than most. They've seen what happens when a government is allowed to target communities based on fear and prejudice, when constitutional rights are suspended in the name of national security, when ordinary people are demonized as threats to public safety. Maya Suzuki Daniels, whose grandfather served in the U.S. military while his relatives were in internment camps, PEE, viewed it simply, "My family understands what forced displacement and mass incarceration looks like. The question now is whether the rest of America will recognize the warning signs and take action before it's too late." Amanda Trebach's arrest should be a wake-up call. When federal agents can violently arrest U.S. citizens for exercising their constitutional rights, when they can operate with masked faces and refuse to identify themselves, when they can hold people without charges and face no consequences, that's not law enforcement, that's authoritarianism. And it's happening at a location that was specifically chosen to send a message. Terminal Island isn't just a convenient staging area for ICE operations. It's a symbol. It's a reminder of what this government is capable of when it decides that certain communities don't deserve constitutional protections. The community organizers, On Terminal Island understand this. They're not just trying to protect immigrant families from raids, they're trying to prevent the normalization of tactics that threaten everyone's rights. Because once we accept that federal agents can arrest U.S. citizens for documenting their activities, once we accept that they can use excessive force without accountability, once we accept that entire communities can be terrorized in the name of law enforcement, there's no telling where it ends. The bronze fishermen at the Terminal Island Memorial stand facing opposite directions, looking out over the water where a vibrant community once thrived. They serve as a reminder of what was lost when fear and prejudice were allowed to override constitutional principles. Today, as federal agents drive past that same memorial on their way to conduct raids, the question is whether we'll learn from that history or repeat it. Amanda Trebach's arrest suggests we may already have our answer, but the community organizers who secured her release, who continue to monitor ICE operations despite the risks, who refuse to be intimidated by increasingly aggressive federal tactics, they represent a different choice. They represent the possibility that this time enough Americans will stand up and say, never again. The story of Terminal Island isn't over. What happens next depends on whether we're willing to defend the constitutional rights that are under assault, whether we're willing to support the communities that are being targeted, and whether we're willing to learn from a history that's literal, written in the landscape around us. The memorial stands as a warning. The question is whether we're listening.